Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, this is Bigmeks Workshop and Paint Studio. I'm Dodge and today we are painting this old school Librarian. The reason for that is someone purchased this, wanted us to paint it, so that's what we were going to do. So that is what we're going to do. Just having a quick look around, there's a lot of detail on this model. And you'll be pleased to know that it's mainly Games Workshop paints this week, and we actually have them right on the screen this time. So that's something new. It's just going to take us a lot longer to edit these videos. So straight off the bat, since we're sticking in Games Workshop and I feel quite limited, I'm going to be using Macragge Blue mixed with INCUBI Darkness. Basically, I didn't have a paint that I thought would be the efficient colour, so you will find me a lot mixing paints here. It was a bit of a challenge just doing this with almost entirely Games Workshop paints. I do think there's two somewhere that are probably model colour. After that, again we're going to mix some colours up. We're going to use Null Oil and Army Painter Blue Tone. Okay, so I need to make a thing for Army Painter Blue Tone, but with the time it is on Friday, I probably will not bother doing that. But all the other little lower thirds, those names that come up, they're all being created at the moment. They just take me a long time to create them. Then it takes even longer to put them in. So now we're going to go back to the Macragge Blue and the INCUBI Darkness mix that we previously had. Now we've darkened everything down considerably and start building up those top layers. We're going to start on the shoulder pads, and basically this is going to cover at least 2/3 of what we've just done. But what we're going to end up with is a really nice rounded three-dimensional looking armour by the time we've finished applying our blues. So next up, as that didn't make that much of a difference, but it's just about noticeable, is we're going to use Macragge Blue on its own now. Again, I'm just glazing these on, so I'm starting from about halfway down that leg and then shading upwards. Then as that dries, going a bit further down the leg and shading upwards. This way all the paint, the really thin paint, ends up at the top in multiple layers and just helps you transition along. I do apologise if I sound a bit rattly in the chest. I wasn't going to record the audio for this today, but I needed to get it out of the way and I've had the flu, so I apologise for that. Next, we're going to just add Aldorf Guard Blue. Sorry, no, that's Aldorf Guard Blue on its own. We're doing essentially the same thing, we're just going over and over, and we're just going to keep making the areas smaller and smaller, but as you can see, those blues are starting to pop out a little bit now. So we have a nice light area to work with and a much darker area. This always brings your model to life, gives it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. Because you don't want flat colours really. Now we're going to use Alatic Blue, or Alitoc Blue, however that's pronounced. I'm sure Lehman Russ will let me know. And at this point, I am only working on top surfaces of things really. And you can see by the video which bits I'm going to start picking out, and you can see them really starting to build up. I was quite happy with this. You could do this with all of your painting. Just keep doing lots of different layers and just building them up slowly. Next, we're going to add TECLIS Blue into the Alitoc Blue. And at this point, we're getting a nice Librarian blue colour. You can keep him darker if you wanted to, but I just wanted to make this one stand out a little bit more. And as you can see, just doing those different layers of colour and keeping your paint extremely thin. I'm always using a wet palette, it does help. Helps stop clogging up the detail so you can add more and more layers. Next is Hero Blue, which is a scale of 75, which I'm going to start using for the edges. But if you don't have the Hero Blue by scale 75, you can use Lawthorn by Games Workshop, which is the equivalent to it. It was quite a jump in brightness, but I do think it works very well for edge highlighting these. And if you really wanted to, you could add some white in and pick out the most vibrant corners. Next, we're going to start doing the cloak, as that's the second largest part of this model. So we're going to start with XV88. Keep this really thin and be very careful not to get this on your blues, since it'll take ages to fix those back up. And don't worry if you think the blues of the armour need a little bit more shade and a little bit more depth, because like with all of our models, we usually, 90% of the time, will put a oil wash or a pin wash in there. And by the end, you'll see the difference that pin wash makes. Next up, I haven't tried doing this technique before. I thought it'd be different, so I'm going to add UNGOR Flesh by Games Workshop into the X388. I've only just remembered I don't need to tell you that it's a Games Workshop, because they're all pretty much Games Workshop paints. And I've got these things now in the top corner as well. All we're doing here is glazing up and down the length of the cloak, up and down the length of the cloak. Same way we did the armour, just a little bit at a time, let it dry, come back to it. The more patient you are with this, the better off you are. Now we're going to add more UNGOR Flesh into the X388. This is just to help it transition nice and gently rather than one colour to another. So even if you're not very good at painting, you can still, by mixing paints, you can still get a decent blend. We're starting to get somewhere with that now. We're starting to get a decent transition. It's an interesting colour, I find. I'm going to add some extra shade to it now with REKLAND Flesh Shade. This is watered down because I didn't want to go over the top. I did let it sit and pull a little bit too much in the front, but putting on the extra details with the trim. It's one of those cloaks, it's got the decorative trim on it. Once they're on, it's not as noticeable. And of course, after that, once it's dried, I'm going to go back to the UNGOR Flesh, which was previously our top highlight, and start bringing out the curves of the cloaks again. I do enjoy doing cloaks. Never used to when I started painting, but glazing paint can be very therapeutic and just very relaxing if you've got the patience for it. And sometimes you just can't be bothered, you just want to throw some paint down. Really depends what mood you're in. Again, we're just going to keep following the edges there. Start bringing those up. Next up, we're going to mix USHABTI Bone into the UNGOR Flesh. And you can really start to see the colour transition now on this cloak. I think one of the reasons I like doing cloaks is the movement that you can try and capture. It really does help you learn to shade. So if you just wanted to practice your glazing and your shading, I'd recommend getting a box of something with lots of cloaks and keep trying to paint those. Next up, it's USHABTI Bone on its own, and we're being really sparing with this and just bringing out the top highlights of everything. So all those bits of cloak that are wisping in the wind, you want the very tips of those, depending on the highlights you're trying to do actually. If you're doing a zenithal, you just want the top ones, but going for more of a, I can't remember what the other one's called now, more of a 360 Games Workshop style of shading and lighting. Basically, I took the box art idea and then started mucking about with the colours that I had available to me and just made up my own thing. Next, we're going to use Tusker Fur, because I thought there was a lot of that UNGOR Flesh, and I decided the back of the cloak needed to be a slightly different colour. So Tusker Fur was used, and I'm also going to use Tusker Fur as the base for his face as well. And of course, now I've done his face in Tusker Fur, I'm going to add CADIAN FLESHTONE into the Tusker Fur, and I've switched to a smaller brush. No, not yet. I still think it's a layer brush, small Games Workshop layer. I'm going to start bringing out the cheekbones and the sides of his head next to that weird skull cap thing he's got going on, and bring out the top of his nose. You want to be really sparing with this, let it dry and come back. You never want to rush skin tones, and you definitely never want to rush faces. Like I was saying before, if you've got the patience, you can really enjoy painting things like this. Then we're going to go to straight CADIAN FLESHTONE. I find that working in a smaller area, it's better to make the jumps slightly larger from one colour to another, rather than blending colours together and mixing them so much. As you can see, we're starting to bring that face out pretty well now, just with those few colours. Next up, this is a wash, and it's a mix of 2 drops REKLAND Flesh Shade, 1 drop Juicy Violet. I've watered that down with airbrush thinner, as I usually do. And you don't want to let it pull too much in those recesses. You just want to shade the face. It's going to pull the CADIAN flesh and the Tusker fur layers that we've done together and act as a filter, so any hard brush strokes will be less obvious. It's also going to add that much needed depth to the character of his face. Yeah, while that was drying, I decided to jump onto the metalwork, and we're going to use Warplock Bronze. With this model, just like the last model, I think the Pravian that I did, the Pravian had a lot more metallics on it, but I'm getting really tired of metallics, and this is where I regretted just using Games Workshop paints. Games Workshop metallics are terrible. I can't get on with them. Like, some of them can be okay, but a lot of the time they separate. They're like bits of glitter. So I prefer to use a Scale 75 and Model Air metallic ranges. Next, I'm going to go back to that CADIAN FLESHTONE again. If you remember, we just did a wash on that, so now doing the CADIAN flesh won't be completely redundant. It will bring some extra colour to the face. I'm going to start going over the top areas again. Like I keep saying, you start at about 2/3 of the model, then like 3/4, etc. And you just keep building up your steps smaller and smaller till the area that you're covering with each highlight is a little bit smaller. It's something to be used in every bit of painting that you're doing for every model. Now this fella's got a beard. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on camera, but we're going to use Mechanicus Standard Grey to start picking out the area around his chin where his beard is. It gives a good coverage, and it's a nice base. It contrasts well against the other colour. It's not like a bluey grey or a whitish grey. So it just seemed to be the perfect colour to get in between everything else, the blues and the skin. I do apologise that I keep drifting off to the side with the camera. The camera positioning for this video has not been the greatest. That's because I moved some stuff around on my desk recently, and I haven't been able to get my decent camera angle back. And then we're going to use Calestria Grey. Well, I don't even have to pronounce them right now anyway, because they're written on the top of the screen. So, yeah. This is now a Winsor Newton Series 7, and I'm just very gently picking up the individual hair strands on his beard as they are sculpted in quite well. Next, I'm going to start working on his Aquila, because it's always best to work from inside out with one of these models. I'm going to start working with Balthazar Gold. As you can see, you want to be careful not to hit anything else with that. I should have probably done the Aquila before the cloak. But next we're going to cover that with Brass Scorpion. The reason I put the Balthazar Gold on there is because it was a small area and I didn't want to clog it up with Brass Scorpion by trying to cover that black area there. I wanted a better coverage, so Balthazar Gold made a decent base for it. And as always, I am mixing my paints, so I'm going to use Brass Scorpion and add a little bit of RUNELORD Brass into it. Like I've said before, personally I find it easier to mix paints to what I want rather than looking through the Games Workshop collection and hoping I can find one that matches. For this bit, all we're doing is highlighting the feathers on the Aquila, just ever so slightly, bringing out the sharp edges on them and maybe the bit where the feather curves as well, just trying to bring that out a little bit lighter. Next, we're going to apply a REKLAND flesh shade to that. That's just to add some depth to the brass scorpion, because at the moment it was just brass scorpion. And now brass scorpion with RUNELORD brass. So we've gone a highlight, now we're going to add a shade. It's also going to pull the RUNELORD brass bright areas back down a little bit to make everything there look a little bit more uniform. And then on its own, just RUNELORD brass for the very tips of the feathers and the very edges. And that should be that bit pretty much done. Only a few colours for that one, but you can take it as far as you want. It really does depend how much effort and how much time you want to put into a model. Also, mainly, how much patience have you got? Next up is a Retributor armor. That's on its own. Be careful not to clog these details, but that gold is going to add another bright colour to the model and bring out those pipes, because there's a lot of details on the front. We need to be able to determine from a distance what is what. So started those with a base of RUNELORD, sorry, a base of Retributor armor, and those pipes, they do go around the back as well, so don't forget to do the back parts. After that, I'm going to add brass scorpion very thinly to what was the previous colour down there? Balthazar gold. I just start bringing up the shoulder pad details. The shoulder pads end up doing this one metallic colour, whereas the decorative skulls on his knee pads and everything end up going the Retributor armor way. That's just to break it up so it doesn't all look uniform. I hate Games Workshop metallics. Retributor armor, and now we're going to add Iron Breaker. But I did cheat a bit because my Iron Breaker's messed up, and I did use an equivalent from the Model Painter, Model Air Metallic range, sorry. But you'll get the same result. All I'm doing here is overbrushing the tops of those pipes that we did in Retributor armor. Starting at the top, so I've got barely anything on my paintbrush there, and then working my way down to the bottom, so there's nothing at all. It's more of a little dry brush at the very bottom, and that's going to blend it nice and easily in one swift movement. Decided to start picking out that pendant in brass scorpion. This is one of those models that's really difficult to keep on camera properly. Anything that's got a staff that sticks out like that always tends to be a pain, because the staff is actually where I want to put my hand while I'm painting. And the book as well, so I do apologise for this. We're going to do the cover of the book in Doom Brown. Now, if I could paint with both hands, that would be very useful. So that's a nice base coat of Doom Brown on that. Then we're gonna add a REKLAND flesh shade wash while that's drying onto the Retributor armor pipes that we did. You definitely want to keep this one very thin and very sparing. You don't want that to flood onto the rest of the model, as it's connected to all those other details. Also, I believe the chain is painted now. I can't quite tell from where I'm sat. If that paint's cheated, if the chain around his neck is painted, that was done in Iron Breaker as well. I just picked it up off camera. After that, as we were waiting for the book to dry, I'm going to go back to Doom Brown and KHORNE Red, which is a mix. I've mixed it just enough to start bringing the red tones out a little bit more out of the browns. as I want it to be a sort of red weathered leather book, but you can't really see that much on it, so I don't deem it that necessary to put too much detail on it. Obviously you can if you want to, you don't have to. And as you can imagine here, it's really difficult for me to get that on camera for you. Next, well, this is pretty much for every single seal or scroll, we're going to start with Steel Legion Drab. I have started, like I did in the beginning of the video, trying to do each set of colours as one at once, like the armour and the cloak, but with this, each part was so small that I kept having to wait for the paint to dry, so I just kept jumping from one bit to another. We'll see if we can get everything down in one section colour-wise in the future. Now it's just KHORNE red on its own. Obviously we're waiting for the Steel Legion Drab to dry, so let's just jump to another colour. I do think half of this hobby is waiting for paint to dry. After the KHORNE red, we are going to use Carroburg Crimson, I believe. Yeah, I think that is Carroburg Crimson. Just to pull all those reds together. And also add a little bit more depth in those creases. And the staff, which I rather did enjoy doing the handle for this, it's just INCUBI Darkness on its own. Which is a colour I am quite fond of from the Games Workshop range. You will need to do several really thin coats of this, as the pattern and design on it doesn't have that much depth, so you don't want to flood them. But if you put it on in enough thin layers, then you'll be able to get those other colours over the pattern, over the top, without smudging too much. This is Rhinox hide for his holster. Not going to go too detailed on this holster, to be honest. At this point of the model, I was starting to look at how long it was taking and needed to get this done. After that, this is a colour we've only just purchased recently. It's another primer. It's called Israeli Sand, and that's by Vallejo. It's a primer. This one, unlike the black primer, does not like to go on with the brush very well, which is a bit of a shame, so you'll have to water this down and put it on in a few layers. The reason he's getting this coloured shoulder pad is because the person who purchased it wants it done for White Scars. I thought, yeah, we'll put the chapter logo where it should be, on his left shoulder pad. Although we don't have the decals to put on there for him. Now, this is Retributor Armour and Ironbreaker again. Except there's a lot more Ironbreaker in it this time to lighten it up. And as you can see there, I'm just doing a very cheeky overbrush. Being really sparing and taking I've sped the video up, but I am taking my time doing this. And as you can see, that contrast's absolutely superb. I really do like the details on that staff. They did a good job with that sculpt. And the sculpt decided to go for Balthazar Gold again as a base. I was going to do it bone, but don't know why I didn't. I was going to actually, remembering now, I was going to take that sort of bone colour and mix it in with the Balthazar Gold to see what I could come up with. But maybe I'll save that for another video. Next up, we're going to add Hashut Copper to the Balthazar Gold. I'll start bringing out the raised areas. Again, when it comes to skulls, you want to make sure you do the forehead, the brow, the cheekbones, the nose and the teeth with the second layer. The washes will help contrast and bring all those together. Sorry, the washes will help blend, not contrast, and bring that contrast together. Next up, we've got Hashut Copper on its own. Being quite sparing with this as it's quite a vibrant colour. Next, we're going back to the scrolls again. Now they're dry and we're going to use Baneblade Brown. We're not going to cover the whole scroll, we're just going to cover all those raised sections using the glazing techniques that we used to paint the armour. So starting from that shaded area to the light areas at the top, and do that in lots and lots of layers. Obviously there's a little book at the back here, so I'm counting that as the same colour as the scrolls as well. And I think that's it for scrolls, if I remember correctly, although there is a little cherub, like, was it cherub baby angel thing that has its own scroll, which we'll do in the same colours as well. And don't worry, we will get around to that, although there's not that much to do with it. Decided to jump to the Wazdaka Red now, just as a final edge highlight for the books. Obviously there's a book there that's been done the same colour as the book at the top there. It's bringing out that edge, and if you really wanted to highlight that one more time, I'd recommend adding a little bit of RAKARTH flesh into your Wazdaka, and that brings out a nice muted leathery red for the top. Next up, we haven't had an Agrax Earth Shade wash yet, and what painting tutorial is complete without an Agrax Earth Shade wash? We're going to apply that over our previous colour of Baneblade Brown. This is watered down, but this is a foolproof way of doing scrolls, really. This simple colour combination, although there's a few variants of it, really brings that shape to life. And the trim at the bottom of the cloak there was done the same way as the Retributor armour. The Retributor armour decorative parts. Next is Model Colours Sky Grey. And that's to highlight the white shoulder pad, starting from the recesses, bringing it up to the top. Now, because it's such a light colour, I don't know how well that will show up on the camera, so apologies if it doesn't show up very well. Dry, we're going to jump to Ghost Grey by Model Colour to then highlight that even further. And next up, I needed to start picking out all the other parts that hadn't been done. So for the grenade on his front, I did that in Castilian green, which is a good base for a grenade. It's not as good as the combination of scale 75 colours I was using before, but you can always just do what I do in a minute. And those that watch the channel often will realise that I'm probably just going to add RAKARTH flesh. I want a highlight colour for something, add RAKARTH flesh to it. Oh no, this isn't RAKARTH flesh for the Castilian green. This is RAKARTH flesh because I missed some scrolls and I wanted to make them look slightly different to the rest of them, so that they stuck out a little bit from the cloak that he has. So I started those with a RAKARTH flesh. Maybe they're made of a different paper or fabric or whatever. I really needed to make those stand out though, because there's a lot going on with the front of this model. Next, I'm going to use Dryad bark on the gun holster. just blending that from the lower areas to the top, and make the fold of the holster as well, flops over the top, make that a little bit brighter than the rest of it as well. And according to my notes, I do just add RAKARTH flesh to the Castilian green to start highlighting that grenade. Yeah, I would have assumed I would. It's a must-have paint. I don't think people use it enough. RAKARTH flesh is awesome. And you should have at least 2 tubs of it on your desk. At all times. And like I was saying, this is the Dryad bark we just did. Just add a little RAKARTH flesh to it for a highlight. Now that did go on a little strong there, where I've mixed the colour contrast bright, so I'll scrape the paint off my brush, go in, and then just blend that in by feathering the paints together with a little bit of water. And as always, we've got an Agraxa shade wash for those colours because it matches really well. Really good at blending those browns together, it being a brown wash. We'll give that a couple of coats just to help that transition, as I did go a little bit over the top. And next is Balthazar Gold and Runefang. And what was I using this for? This is what I start edge highlighting all the silver and golds with. Not the golds, sorry, just the just the golds, not the silvers. Just to give a contrast, because we need a little bit of bright silver to those edges. There is quite a lot of metallics on this. Didn't have to do it in metallics. I probably could have done a lot of those little symbols in bone. But I was just taking the cover art and manipulating it and doing what I wanted to do with it. Now the weird lobotomized cherub thing, which Arch Warhammer has a brilliant video on, is it Servitors? So go check Arch Warhammer's video out on that. It's brilliant. And this colour is Bugman's Glow. We're not going to do the entire cherub because a lot of the colour schemes that are going to get used on it were just used previously, and we're getting close to the end of the video, and I thought already it's quite a long one. And I can't expect you to sit and watch through the whole thing. Especially, there's no need for the repetition, definitely. After that, we're going to add CADIAN flesh to the Bugman's Glow. It's very similar to how we did the skin for the Librarian himself. I just brought it up a little bit lighter for this cherub. I did really enjoy painting this. It was small, simple. And obviously really, really weird. Because thanks Games Workshop. Then we're going to use CADIAN flesh on its own. If you watch these tutorials often, you'll be seeing a pattern here with the way I paint. Seems to be a pattern I can't get out of at the moment. I would like to try some new things, so hopefully before next year or the beginning of next year I'll come up with some new techniques that I like to use. But you know, best way to do that is for me to find a project I can really enjoy and just dive head on into it. And after the CADIAN flesh, we're going to add RAKARTH flesh into it, of course. And just those few little colour transitions really start to bring the shape of it out. Next, we're going to give it a very soft REKLAND flesh shade wash. As you can see, that's really, really thin. It's just to help blend those colours together. Not that it really needed it that much. You could probably get away without using the REKLAND flesh shade. But it's just more of a habit for me, trying to make everything more uniform. Entirely up to you whether you apply that one or not. Right, let's crack on with the wings, and then we are nearly finished. So this is the Fang, which was a pretty solid base coat for these wings. As you can see that I've already done the scrolls, and I start picking out the other bits as well, just off camera. There's no need for this video to be longer than it has to be. Covered in the same video. After the Fang, we're going to jump to Rust Grey. I'm still using a layer brush for this. And we're just going to slightly, very gently, touch the shape of the feathers with this. As you can see, it's quite thin as I work my way down. Using that top of the wing to get most of the paint off the brush. Then as I get further and further down, where it gets darker, I actually have less and less paint on my brush naturally. After that, we're going to use Fenrisian Grey. We're going to do pretty much the same technique, but we're going to apply a little less and further down the feathers. I have just tried applying an oil wash to these feathers, so I hope they come out okay. The definition's not that great underneath for the oil to sit in. Maybe should have gone in with a paintbrush to do that. We'll see how it turns out. After Fenrisian Grey, the spine was done in Brass Scorpion, and that was to help make him match everything else on the model. And his little dagger and everything has been done in the same colours, the Ironbreaker and Runefang. And for his shield, we want the little white scars colour on one side. So we're not going to paint that here because you've just seen how we were doing the white scars colours. And he's pretty much finished at this point. I'm just going to add an Eshin Grey around the inside of that shield. And that will be this model pretty much finished. So there you have it, guys. After the oil wash, or the pin wash I should say, this is the result. It came out alright. The oil wash usually does do them quite a lot of justice. Bit of a pain to paint at times. As well, a bit of a pain to record because of that spear knocking the camera out of focus a lot of the time. So as we've got to the end of the video, do hope you liked that. If you've got any questions, leave a comment. We do try and respond to everybody. If you want to help support the channel so we can make more tutorials like this for you, join us on Patreon. Speaking of our patrons, we've got a thank you to give to our top paying patrons. You guys are awesome. The Alt Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hofbauer, Warren, DWAC, Agmassive Dawn, Mark and Dave. You guys are awesome, and you support this channel and help us buy more models and things like that to paint for the tutorials. So go check out our Patreon, guys, if you want to help out. Don't forget to hit like on this video, hit share. And speaking of sharing, go check out the Outpost if you want to get a 15 to 20% off on all hobby supplies, including all paints and models that are usually in these videos. And whenever you follow the link in our description and purchase something from them, they give us some store credit as well. So if you don't want to join us on Patreon, use the affiliate link for the Outpost, and that'll also help fund us so we can make more videos for you guys. And I think that is everything. Don't forget to hit like, share with your friends, and we'll catch you in the next one, guys.